Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 2nd of January of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. As you know, Russia attacked Ukraine with significant number of missiles, and according to Ukrainians, the Russians attacked Ukraine with around 100 cruise missiles of different types using few waves of attacks, and also the Russians attacked Ukraine with 11 Kinzhals, the hypersonic missiles, further using few waves of attack. Also during the day we got a lot of updates of drone attacks of the type of Shahed. And you know that I have a lot of questions about those attacks, a lot of questions, and the first question is, where is Ukrainian air defense? Because according to the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, they reported that during the day they managed to shut down every single Kinzhal that the Russians launched in direction of Ukraine. But later we got geolocated video confirmation of another Russian strike with Kinzhal. We don't have like 10 geolocations, but we have just one. But it is enough to say that Ukrainian Ministry of Defense are lying. And for example, on this video we see the moment of strike, we see the plasma sign of the missile. And the strike and the missile was so fast that, take a look at this picture. This is the Kinzhal plasma sign. Just take a look at this picture. You're gonna see that even birds haven't mentioned and haven't seen the strike, and only when missile got the surface, the birds start flying to the sky. So the first question, where was the Ukrainian air defense? And you know, we got an answer to this question. We got an answer to this question based on this video. On this footage, for example, we can see the missile of Western countries of IRIS-T. As you can see, we can recognize the IRIS-T missiles based on the shadow or the symbol of this missile. And as you can see, the Ukrainians were trying to shut down the Russian missiles using not just the old Soviet air defense system, but also modern air defense systems like IRIS-T. But it didn't help them, and basically a lot of these air defense missiles basically fell down, let's say in Dnipro River or somewhere between buildings. The second question I have is why the Russians took a decision to attack Ukraine during the daylight. So there might be a lot of explanations of that, and probably the first one is that the Ukrainians did the same in Belgorod when they bombed the central part of the city using multi-launch rocket system and with cluster rounds, and as a result of those strikes there were casualties among civilians, and the Ukrainians used the daylight to attack Russia. So maybe this is the reason why the Russians also took a decision to attack Ukraine during the daylight. But I'm not sure about this. Probably the Russians took a decision to attack during the daylight because they just wanted to show. In the previous days, let's say during the 2023 and late 2022, the Russians preferred to attack Ukraine during the night period of time for many reasons. First of all, to reduce the losses among civilians. The second reason is to reduce the visibility of missiles because it's very difficult to recognize them in the black sky. And the third reason is to attack when the Ukrainians didn't expect. And now we see attacks during the daylight, and we see the significant results. And first of all, Ukraine air defense always report about that they managed to shut down every single missile from the Russian side, and many other stories and fairy tales from their side. And now the Russians attack Ukraine during the daylight, and we start receiving significant number of geolocated videos from people that show us that the Ukrainian air defense is not perfect. It's not perfect at all. It's even unperfect, completely unperfect. It's has a lot of gap, a lot of holes in the entire system. Furthermore, we got, for example, this is another example of video how the Russian missile Ha-101 was flying above Kiev, and we see that there are no problem from the Ukrainian air defense forces. Now we are moving to another city, to Kharkiv area, where we also have a lot of, let's say, geolocated videos and explosions. For example, on this video, we can see how the Russians managed to got probably the gas station, and after that we see the secondary detonation, and as a result of the secondary detonation, we see a very heavy explosion. So the second question I have, the next question I have, why the Russians did take a decision to attack in January? Why today? Why not a month ago? Why not 2 months ago? Why not tomorrow? And the answer is very simple. First of all, we need to understand that today the Russians haven't started today. They haven't started all these missile strikes today. The Russians started this situation probably months ago. Exactly a month ago, the Russians start bombing and attacking Ukraine with Shahed drones. Just remember the situation before the New Year Eve. On the night between 30 and 31st of December, Russia attacked Odessa with 40 Geran drones. From the 9th on 31st, from 31st to 1st of January, the Russians attack Ukraine with 90 drones. Significant number, you understand this, right? And today we got significant number of cruise missiles and Kinzhals. So, and the Russians didn't start this situation the 30th of December. They started a very long time ago. Just remember the 14th of December when Vladimir Putin had his speech. And that was probably the first day when the Russians start bombing Ukraine in Starokonstantinov, in Khmelnytsky airfields. And as a result of those strikes, if you remember, the Russians reported they managed to get some NATO officers in some bunker without any geolocated confirmations. So the Russians started a long time ago. But just today, they took a decision to attack Ukraine during the daylight and to give people understanding in Ukraine what happens while you're sleeping. What happens while the Russians are trying to destroy the military infrastructure in Ukraine when you're sleeping? Just take hear once again the words of Minister of Defense and make your own conclusions. And the final reason why the Russians start all this activity right now, if you remember, a year ago, on the late December and the beginning of January of 2023, the Russians have made almost the same. If you remember, during those days, the Russians were bombing Ukraine heavily in December of 2022, in November, in January, and after that, in the beginning of January, the Russians announced about Orthodox Christmas ceasefire. And after that, the Russians, after 3 or 2 days of ceasefire, the Russians launched a very powerful offensive operation. And as a result of that attack, the Russians managed, first of all, to establish control over Solidar. And after that, after a few months later, the Russians established complete control over Bakhmut, Artyomovsk. And that was the end of Russian offensive operation, winter offensive operation. So now the Russians are using the same pattern. And they're planning to attack Ukraine. And this is the final question I have: what direction does the Russians chosen? Because I don't see that the Russians are planning to start another big offensive somewhere from Sinkovka to Kherson, because they have already launched a series of attacks in Robotyne, in Avdiivka, in Sinkovka, in Bakhmut, and we see and we can confirm that everything is very difficult. We're not saying that the Russians are losing, we're not saying that the Russians are significantly winning, but they're moving very slowly, very slowly. Of course, some can say that the main purpose of the Russians is not the ground, but to reduce the Ukrainian forces. Yes, and you will be right. But from the other hand, we see that while the front line goes like this one, like current situation, the Ukrainians still have possibilities to bomb a city like Donetsk. On the New Year Eve, the Ukrainians still have possibilities to bomb Belgorod with cluster rounds during the daylight. So this is not the solution, not the explanation. And as I understand, probably the Russians do have some plans, because the governor, for example, of Chernihiv area told us today that the Russians can concentrate a significant army on Chernihiv area just in 2 weeks, and they can attack in any direction. And probably this is an explanation why the Ukrainians are trying to build a defense belt along the border with Belarus, but we don't have any updates for any reasons of that. The Ukrainians are building significant number of defense line in Chernihiv, in Sumy area, in Kharkiv area, with the purpose to secure the borders and to secure the territory on the border with Belarus, Kursk, Belgorod, and Bryansk area. So maybe the Russians do have some plans to attack Ukraine, not from the original direction, but to attack Ukraine, let's say, somewhere or to the west of Kharkiv. Who knows? Because this is the only chance, as I understand, for Russians if they want to finish this war fast. Because to fight along the original combat line cost them losses, and the most important resource, it cost them time. And I'm not sure whether the Russians have a lot of time for the special military operation. Now let's move to the ground, because we have also a lot of updates from the ground. And first let's talk about Sinkovka, about Kupiansk direction. Today the Russian sources reported that during the previous 24 hours the Russians attack and bomb Sinkovka and Kupiansk direction with more than 25,500. They managed to deal significant losses to the 43rd Mechanized Brigade. This brigade has a significant number of losses and probably lost its combat capabilities. But we got this report just as a result of Telegram messages without any geolocated video proofs. The only geolocated proof we got from Sinkovka area is this video. On this sense, we can see the Ukrainian infantry, 3 soldiers were moving on the northern part of the village, and they were clearing the latest and the edge Russian trenches in this area. And this is the geolocated confirmation that the battle for Sinkovka, at least as of 2nd of January, was ended and in Ukrainian favor. We will adjust the map before the next video. And according to all these geolocations, the Ukrainians probably managed to restore control over the village, and they forced the Russians to step back further to the forest in this area. I'm not saying that the Russians are not going to make another attempt, another let's say chance. They will obviously continue offensive operation in Sinkovka, but now they need a few days, maybe weeks for the grouping and to find a solution how to penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt. And they may be in a week or maybe after Orthodox Christmas and Orthodox ceasefire that I expect is going to take place, the Russians will renew their offensive operation. Now we are moving to Liman area, and we got also a lot of updates from this territory, probably very interesting ones, and they are very important. Just pay attention. First, we got the video from Zherebets River, from the line of Terny, somewhere in the vicinity of Terny. The Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian tanks, Leopards, and as a result of Lancet strikes and FPV drone strikes, those tanks were destroyed. The Russians managed to destroy 2 Leopards, 2 Ukrainian Leopards. First, they damaged them, and those the damage the deal forced the Ukrainian mech drivers to leave and abandon the tanks. And after that, using Lancet, the Russians destroyed those armored vehicles completely. And this is a very important video, and the reason is that take a look at the geolocation of the strike. As you know, there is a river by the name of Zherebets that goes from Seversky Donetsk, from Tarskoye, Zarechnoye to the north along the villages like Mirna, Yampolovka, Terny, Ivanovka, Novosadovo, Nevskovo, Novolubovka, and somewhere Makeevka and further to the north. And as you can see, the Russians managed to destroy the Ukrainian tanks exactly on the area, on the transferring area, the area along the roads that connects one side of Zherebets River with another. So, as I understand, the Ukrainians probably had some plans to regroup, to redeploy some Leopards from this bank of Zherebets River to Terny, let's say to support the Ukrainian defense forces along this line, and probably to slow down and stop Russian advances, Russian offensive operations somewhere in Tarskoye salient. But somewhere on this area, those tanks were discovered and destroyed. And this means just one thing. And I'm saying that the Russians managed to establish complete and full fire control, FPV drone control, Lancet control, artillery control over every single supply road and communication road that goes along Zherebets River. And from now, the Ukrainians lost their possibilities to redeploy forces from one side of Zherebets River to another. Now they face real logistical issues. Of course, the Russians still don't have possibilities to penetrate this defense belt because there are still some forces, some ammo, some support on this bank of the river. But now, as I understand, it's just a matter of time. In a day or in a 2 or after the Orthodox Christmas, the Russians will renew their offensive operation, and the exhausted Ukrainian forces without a proper support will be forced to step back or surrender. So the situation for Liman obviously will continue developing. Now we are moving to Solidar area, and today the Russian sources, without any geolocated proofs or confirmations, reported that the Russians launched an offensive operation in direction of Vysyola from the south, like this one, and the second attack took place from the railways from the northern part of the village. And as you can see, the Russians are trying to take Veselin, the pincers, to encircle and to force the Ukrainians to step back. So we need more details to confirm this information. For now, we're not going to change anything on the map, but this is very important and expected updates from this direction. Now we're moving to Bogdanovka. As we discussed, as a result of Russian offensive operation, we got the first geolocated video of Russian presence in Bogdanovka. We will adjust the map. Now we don't have any doubts about the Russian progress in this area. This territory will be colored. Furthermore, right before I start making this video, we got another geolocation that confirms the Russian presence somewhere on this direction. And if this video is correct, and if there is like such a confirmation, we will discuss this in the morning, that means that the Russians managed to bypass the northern stronghold, this one, and to enter Bogdanovka itself. Furthermore, there was an update, possible control of the Russians over this stronghold interceptions of 3 lines as well. So we need more details, and probably tomorrow we're going to receive significant updates about the progress of the Russian forces in Bogdanovka. When talking about Ivanovska, right before I start making this video, we got important updates that the Ukrainians launched a counteroffensive from Popovo forest in direction of Khromovo. The Ukrainians, according to the Russians, were using significant number of armored vehicles, tanks, infantry, and their main purpose was to cut and to destroy the Russian base of Bogdanovka offensive operation, to slow down the Russians, to force the Russians to redeploy from Bogdanovka to the south significant number of reserves for stabilization of the front line. Yet we haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation of that attack. We need more time to understand whether this information is correct or not. When talking about the southern direction, as we discussed, we have update that the Russians managed to establish control completely over the railways, according to some mappers, and we discussed that we will change the map, we will adjust the territory. So before the next video, we will make something like this. We will show like something like this, and we will not color the railways under the Russian control because we don't have any 100% confirmations of this. But obviously, if it's true, soon we're gonna get some. Now we are moving to Avdiivka direction. We have some updates from the northern part. As we discussed, the Russians started and they stuck, and currently they're facing the final fortification area of Ukrainians in front of this, let's say, residential area between the railways. And the Russians start bombing this territory with artillery, with Krasnopol. They were bombing this territory heavily. There are a lot of strongholds, a lot of underground facilities, a lot of Ukrainian positions. So there are a lot of job to do. If we take a look at the map once again, we see that this stronghold is very huge. There are a lot of things to do, but the Russians have some time probably, and they start bombing this territory. So we expect not like tomorrow, but obviously and probably after the Orthodox Christmas, the Russians will renew their offensive operation with the purpose to establish complete control over this stronghold area. When talking about Avdiivka itself, we got just one video from inside of the city. You see that this is ghost town, and like this city completely reminds us the Bakhmut, Artyomovsk. The buildings are ruined, destroyed. There are no civilians, just infantry, lots of craters of aviation bomb strikes, and nothing more. No updates about any movements of the Russians in direction of Tonika Severna or somewhere in direction of a former aviation base or industrial zone. The only thing we have is a series of FPV drone strikes along the road that connects the forest, let's say industrial zone, with the village by the name of Kamyanka. The Russians probably started their storming operation or its first phase with FPV drone strikes, so probably we need to expect some activity on this direction because this area is silent for too long. Probably 2 or 3 weeks we haven't received even a single geolocated information from this area, and probably this is connected with regrouping and bringing some fresh forces to the combat line. We need to expect some activity, intensifying of actions, obviously. When talking about the South Donetsk direction, we also, as you can see, haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation, even a single FAB strike. The Russians during the previous days, weeks, managed to get as much as possible from this area. The Russians established complete control over Marinka. The Russians started their pressure and pushing in direction of Pobeda and the northern strongholds of Novomikhailovka. The Russians managed to answer and to establish control over the edge positions inside of the village by the name of Novomikhailovka, so everything develops in Russian favor. The only thing they need is to reduce Ukrainian forces in this area with FPV drone strikes, with snipers, with reconnaissance and sabotage groups, and after a week or two or after Orthodox Christmas, the Russians probably will renew their offensive operation and they will try to capture the village or at least to collapse the Ukrainian defense belt. And furthermore, don't forget this: all these strikes with missiles, the final purpose the Russians have is to destroy ammo depots, fuel depots, radars, production of everything, and for the main critical period of time to reduce Ukrainian possibilities in everything. When talking about Remivka tactical bridgehead, we got just one geolocated video how the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian Humvee who was moving, probably evacuating the wounded soldiers from the combat line. The Russians discovered and attacked this Humvee with FPV drone strike. And after that, the machine armored vehicle was damaged and later destroyed inside of the village by the name of Urozhaine. Avdiivka tactical bridgehead, no changes, no videos, so the same story. Everybody during the day paid the focus to missile strikes. Maybe there were some clashes, but I expect them tomorrow. The only thing we have is Ukrainian artillery bombing of the Ukrainian positions, Russian positions on the north to Kopony, which confirms the Russian, let's say, zero line and the Russian forces, location of Russian forces to the north of Kopony, to the east of Nestyryanka, and to the south of Orekhov. When talking about Kherson direction, the same story, no changes, nothing from Krynki. The only thing we got is 2 Lancet strikes against the Ukrainian artillery forces. On this video, we see how the Russians managed to discover Ukraine M109 Palladian system. And as a result of Lancet strike, that system was destroyed. And another video, we got a little bit to the south from the original area to the north of Tyaginka. Another artillery system was discovered and destroyed. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.